I'm Sam Malone, in for Mike G, Mike Gallagher. Great guy. First of all, I'm a fan of Gallagher, friend of Gallagher. And when I get to New York, I'd love to sit down and have lunch with him. He's a great, friendly, approachable, knowledgeable man and a great radio host. Do me a favor. I got to get to a friend of mine on line 6 named Colonel Steve Bucci. Colonel and I have been friends for a bunch of years. He's a former commander of 3rd Battalion, 5th Special Forces Group. And all the military and the National Guard things and all the special operations news, we always go to the colonel on what's going on, especially when bringing in the Guard to protect the Guard thrown out of hotels in Washington by an extremist left-wing mayor, that and others. Colonel Bucci, sir, welcome across America to the Mike Gallagher Show.
Hey, Sam, it's good to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
How can I do a show across America without you? You've been a bud for a long time. One of the stories that just was a punch to the gut was when the mayor of Washington threw out the Guard from a hotel in the D.C. area who were just doing their job protecting the streets. I was shocked and appalled, absolutely blown away by it. Colonel, sir, what was your take?
Well, I mean, it was really petty and sorry thing to do. The mayor obviously had differences with the president and wanted to separate herself from him. So knowing she couldn't really tell the president what to do because, she's the mayor of the city, but D.C. is a special city. It's actually owned by the federal government. It doesn't belong to her. And she only has authority over the D.C. cops, not all the other law enforcement organizations that are there. And frankly, the president is well within his authority to bring the National Guard in to protect all those federal sites that clearly the mayor wasn't going to protect. So instead, she uses her leverage on private hotels to take it out on a bunch of troops, which tells you exactly the kind of person she is. Very petty, very ridiculous response, and frankly of no effect other than, it's like saying nanny, nanny, boo-boo to the president, except that it affects a bunch of young men and women who are there just to serve the country.
They were the Utah National Guard. And then I saw Colonel Steve Bucci, former commander, 3rd Battalion, 5th Special Forces, longtime friend. And then I saw some patches out there. 19th Special Forces was in D.C. They are the true gentlemen soldiers. Tell America about that, Colonel, the 19th.
The 19th are some of our National Guard Special Forces folks from the Utah area. Great people, have been on deployments with several of their A-teams in the past. Totally professional. Frankly, just about as good as any of our active duty guys, and in some cases with more longevity. They've had people on those teams together for, 10, 15 years. So they're really good at what they do. They are just as much the quiet professionals as the active duty guys that I used to lead. Great people to have there, very adaptive, very much people skilled, kind of soldiers. Perfect choice for the some of these protection missions. And they get treated like dung too. That it's just really a slap in the face of young men and women who give their all for this country. They've done it overseas. They've done it domestically. They come here to help protect, our nation's capital, and they get treated that way by the D.C. mayor. Pretty sorry.
It is Colonel Steve Bucci, former commander, 3rd Battalion, 5th Special Forces, now with Heritage and longtime friend. And before them, it was supposed to be the 82nd Airborne. And I remember talking to Colonel Bucci. I'm like, Airborne, the Red Hats, what are they doing? What was the original plan to have Airborne in the middle of the city? Colonel, I did not know the specialization of 82nd Airborne on situations like this.
Yeah, they are, they're America's 911 force for big things. The Marines use that same claim, and they are, because they're floating around on ships out around the world. and many times they're faster to get there than the 82nd. But if you're talking about getting a large force of people, because the 82nd is light infantry, airborne infantry, so they don't bring a lot of big stuff with them, but they bring a lot of really competent young men and women who, have a rock-solid chain of command and organization. They practice civil disorder response. They don't go in there and just kill people. We're talking about operating in America, for goodness sake. They're trained to do good riot control techniques. So if you got to get a lot of people there fast, the 82nd is the right choice. In this case, they went with the National Guard. I think that was probably a good call. As we've talked about before, President Trump many times lays some cards down on the table, and everybody goes, "Oh my gosh, what's he doing?" And then more advice comes in, and he's, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. We'll adjust." And I think that's what he did here. The SecDef and some others said, "Boss, the National Guard's really a better choice for this rather than use the Insurrection Act and having to bring in the active duty guys." Frankly, the National Guard gives you actually more options because they can do law enforcement tasks that the active duty guys cannot. But if you had to get somebody there to protect the Capitol, the 82nd's a good call. We've done that before. During the Vietnam War, they brought in active duty forces to protect many of the federal buildings. When you have people out there not just protesting's fine. Rioting, burning stuff, breaking things, that's a different story. And in that case, you got to protect those facilities, and using our military is an option when the police, can't do it all.
Colonel Steve Bucci, former commander, 3rd Battalion, 5th Special Forces, great friend of our show here in Houston. And, of course, you'll always hear, I know, I'm looking at an article here, National Guard leaves Santa Monica, and they've moved out of California. But you'll always hear people on the left scream out "Posse Comitatus," and I don't know. You probably answered that 10,000 times when dealing with left-wing agitators, sir. They're not there. Go ahead, you take it.
Well, that's not a violation of Posse Comitatus. Our government is very, very cautious about not going near those lines. They know the rules. They got government lawyers all over the place, giving advice to the decision makers. The National Guard, when they are under two of their three main authority statuses, one is state active duty, so they're under the governor of their state and paid by the governor of their state, or a thing we call Title 32, where they're under the command of the governor, but they're paid for by the feds. Then they can operate domestically. They are not hindered whatsoever by Posse Comitatus, which does not mean that you can't use the military domestically. It means the federal military, the active duty guys, cannot do law enforcement domestically. There's a big difference there. That means they can't arrest people. You can use them for crowd control. You can use them for, disaster relief, things like that. None of that violates Posse Comitatus. It's only if you suddenly had, the 82nd coming in and arresting people. The only way they can do that and not violate Posse Comitatus is to invoke what we refer to as the Insurrection Act, and that means the feds are coming in and basically taking over that portion of terrain, or the governor says, "Hey, I need help, come in." The California governor did that during the Rodney King riots. We sent in the 7th Infantry Division, which doesn't exist anymore, went into Los Angeles because the police were basically, they'd lost control. Because it was a police thing, there that they were somewhat compromised. So the governor said, "Please send me help." They used the Insurrection Act, sent in the 7th ID, and they got it under control. In this case, when you're using the National Guard, you don't necessarily have to do that. You don't need the Insurrection Act there. So it's, it was a simpler mix. But yeah, no violations of Party Comitatus anywhere in any of these deployments, anywhere in America during this period.
It's outstanding. Do you get like a walking military Wikipedia? It's like
and I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, Stan. You know that. I'm just a soldier. But my lawyer buddies, I've listened to enough of them to get the good scoop. Ones that are lawyers and soldiers,
right?
And in the military today, you have to have a working knowledge of this because you don't want to get yourself in trouble. You don't want to get your people in trouble. You don't want to get your bosses in trouble. Sometimes civilian bosses, say, "Oh, we need to do this," and you say, "Yeah, boss, there's some rules here. We got to talk about it." And you, as a military leader, you elaborate that for them, and then they most of the time go back to what they should do, and that's what's happened here.
Done deal. Our good friend Colonel Steve Bucci, former commander, 3rd Battalion, 5th Special Forces, probably the guy that Colonel Troutman was modeled after in the Rambo movies, but I can't verify that right now. Colonel, sir, always great.